And then closing with a bit of perspective on how we are approaching systemic theory of change. This is still ongoing work, so very, welcome to hear your thoughts as well on how we can improve this as well. So Foresight4Food Initiative is a global network, and it's really about using foresight, scenario analysis, and gearing towards food systems change. And we are a global network with many different partners there. It's all about enhancing capacities, linking different perspectives from both qualitative and quantitative sides, as well as sharing country experiences and lessons and different regions across the world. And currently we are implementing a program which is called the Foresight for Food System Transformation Program, FOSTER. And it's a 3-year decision support facility, which is meant to also support different countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East to support their food system transformation pathways. And this is funded by the government of the Netherlands, delivered through IFAD, and implemented through University of Oxford and Wageningen University. I work with the University of Oxford, but we're very happy to engage with many other partners in this process. So let me just share you very briefly the context in which we're working. So we've been invited by the Dutch Embassy in Kenya, as well as the World Food Programme, to guide the inception phase of this new program, which I've called Sustainably Unlocking the Economic Potential of Lake Turkana. And that's, of course, the entry point. And it also gives a bit of the scope of what we're trying to do as well. And there are a range of different partners involved, but it's also very important to mention that this is developed together with the Turkana County governments, as well as the Marsabit County governments, two of the largest counties that are surrounding Lake Turkana. And what we can already know from the Lake Turkana setting is that it's highly complex. We've got very challenging conditions. It's a remote desert saline lake. There's a lot of people living around the lake that are dependent on fish, depending on the pastoralist livelihoods. We see very high food and nutrition insecurity in there. That's also primarily one of the key reasons why World Food Programme is driving this. And we see a lot of dynamics which are very difficult to keep track of, including a lot of cross-border as well as conflict dynamics taking place. One pressure, for instance, has been the very long drought that has also been occurring in Kenya for the last couple of years, which has highly affected the pastoralist sector, which has then also influenced the Lake Turkana communities as well. So basically what we're doing as Foresight for Food is that we have basically a couple of models that we're using. We understand that we need a food systems approach to sort of think of how all the different things that are related to food. And we use this food systems model. I won't dive into it in detail. I'm assuming many of you have similar models in your mind when you think about food systems. Of course, it's all around the central food systems activities and the core human systems and natural systems in which it's embedded, but especially also the food system outcomes that are emerging from it, as well as the drivers that are shaping the different contexts and the different food systems in different locations. And we find this important because it's really important that at multi-stakeholder level, we agree on what we want from food systems and how that looks. We recognize that there are different trade-offs between different outcomes and activities that are taking place. We also try to understand all the different food system activities and how they relate and how they would like to perhaps change if we say we want a transformed food system. And we also need to recognize that there are a lot of drivers and feedback loops, and this is often not recognized in a lot of development practice that we've seen in the past. And then finally, also, we like to sort of understand, what incentives, what signals, what ways are there for the system to change, responding to what's happening and the different drivers and trends that are emerging. The second major component that we have is that we bring in the perspective of foresight and futures thinking. So we know, we understand, and we increasingly see that we're living in a time of turbulence, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And we also know that both entails risks and opportunities for different stakeholders now and in the future. But futures thinking then helps to both sort of navigate uncertain and turbulent times. It's also about understanding that different implications of current trends and future uncertainties will emerge, and they will be something that stakeholders will need to respond to. But we also use it as a way of envisaging more desirable alternative futures. So a lot of the times it's about understanding that things are going into a more negative future, but it's also about saying, hey, can we develop, or can we at least think of a way of imagining an alternative future that all the different stakeholders can in some way feel positive about, and that can generate momentum as well. And then finally, it's also about saying, okay, if we imagine the current system and the current situation, how can we nudge systems? How can we mobilize stakeholders and actors to move into more desired directions? And the combination of using systems mapping and systems thinking together with foresight enables a sort of creative tension, which has the opportunity to also unlock current entrenched positions. So in the current situation, some stakeholders might not be incentivized to change things, but on the long run, they might. And this is also an opportunity for engaging in dialogue. So we have a foresight for food system transformation, food systems change process. So we scope the process, we map the food system, we explore future scenarios, and we mobilize for systems change. So this is the process that we go through in this program as well, and that we also want to instill within the partners of this program. And what's key is that this is also iterative, that it keeps going and keeps feeding back into each other, and that it's very strongly supported by evidence-based evidence and informed analysis, but also a very strong stakeholder participation, making sure that it's inclusive, that different stakeholders are involved, and together get a shared understanding and also commitment for change as well. And this is all how we try to build in that foresight process within the different institutions and organizations that we work with as well. So what we've been doing so far in Marsabit and Turkana, this has been a process starting earlier this year. And we have engaged in a range of different multi-stakeholder workshops that have been taking place both in Marsabit as well as Turkana counties, as well as in Nairobi. And many different stakeholders that are all around the fishing sector, but also the Turkana Lake environs, but also key business stakeholders as well as government entities have been invited to different workshops in which we have been going through a range of different steps in both analyzing, but also visioning and also imagining the changes that they would like to achieve within the project, but also in the longer time period. This is a 10-year program. So this is also a program that has the space to be adaptive and also to look into the future a bit more than short-term projects tend to have as well. And what's been really powerful in this process is that we've been able to take people through the stage of scoping, indeed analyzing food systems together, exploring the futures, but also thinking about how we can mobilize for systems change and where we can sort of together with the stakeholders develop sustainable interventions as well. And let me just give you a few examples of some of the tools and approaches we've been using. So this is all very participatory. We try to break it down. The complexity is huge. Every workshop we learn something different, and people tend to disagree on different things that we thought at least would be more clear. But this is what's also part of this process. We're learning as we're going, and we're expanding that knowledge. And what's been really nice is that we've been using very also creative approaches to let people to capture the system, right? So you can indeed have a huge database which captures all the different elements and dynamics of the system, but you can also use things like rich picturing, where we're visualizing the system from the perspective of all the different stakeholders that are there, capturing all these on flip charts, and also together with these stakeholders then discussing these and trying to understand those different perspectives as well. So it's also a tool for analysis, but it's also a tool for sort of getting a shared understanding and getting a bit of buy-in for what we're trying to do as well. What we've also been doing is trend analysis. So we've been using data walks where we've been providing all different types of data and analysis to the different stakeholders. We've been tapping into the historical knowledge of the past. So we've been asking people, for instance, how fish markets looked in 2014, what it looks like today, and what they think based on the trends that they are seeing, what could happen in the future. And we've been doing this for a range of different topics. We've also developed scenarios. So this is what we've been bringing in from a foresight perspective. So we've been combining different uncertainties, different trends in which could move in different directions, and trying to imagine for the different stakeholders the consequences of certain developments happening, right? So a whole range of scenarios were developed, which are both very useful to get a shared understanding of systems dynamics. So you have some very interesting also systemic archetypes that have been emerging throughout this. For instance, scenario 3 for instance, explores that there could be a very big market potential for the fish from Lake Turkana, but it's not controlled, and it becomes a sort of tragedy of the commons. But you also have more sort of very dystopic type of scenarios where a range of different uncertainties just become much worse, and you get a sort of very negative dystopian scenario. And this has been very interesting to discuss these together with the stakeholders to get their understanding of indeed, yeah, what is the current situation? What would be something that they would desire and like to move towards, and also what would be something that they would want to avoid at all costs, which is once again also part of the inclusive participatory character of this approach. We've also been doing a bit of causal loop diagramming. So indeed, not sure if we're doing this according to the book, but I think what's really interesting here is that we're trying to get stakeholders to engage with the concept of feedback. We're trying to get people to think in a non-linear way about how processes happen. We're trying to incorporate aspects of seasonality. We're trying to find out, where are indeed some of the structural bottlenecks, the relational and the transformative issues that could be, stopping change from happening. And trying to get the stakeholders is also to share these different perspectives with us so that we can together come to a couple of leverage points that we think would be very critical for the project to invest in. So when we take all this together, we try to understand the food system. We try to develop different scenarios of what could be. And we also then try to articulate different visions. So we've been using, for instance, CatWove from soft systems methodology to try to articulate what transformation is needed on different aspects from the current situation. And we're trying to bring all that together to develop a number of directions for systems change. And the way we've been doing that is by developing a so-called systemic theories of change, which we've broken up. We've been building up on the idea that if you think about current theories of change, if you think about result change, they're not fully able to deal with the fact that the dynamics of complex adaptive systems are relevant and are reality. So taking on board these ideas of self-organizing, complex relationships, unpredictability of systems, we're trying to sort of embed an idea of what kind of pathways can this project be developing. So just as an example, for instance, we've seen very clearly that the level of knowledge of the ecological situation of the lake is very low. So there's very limited understanding of the knowledge and the data of fish stocks, of the health of the lake, of who's doing what around the lake. So if you think about a sort of different pathway of intervening, you could think about developing a multi-stakeholder research and innovation system in which fishermen are also involved in trying to understand how the lake, what is the situation of the lake, and thereby being able to adapt to seasonality, to different changes in the system, to also understand whether or not there's an ecological situation that would affect them negatively in the future. But essentially, there's a range of different actions and outcomes that will develop that will support, that will create also the motivation for actors to join in with this program. Processes is the third component, which is about getting a range of processes, both programmatic as well as multi-stakeholder, in place, so that stakeholders also taking charge and taking ownership of this program, which is a problem of the past, where you have a lot of white elephants that have been developed in that area before. For instance, a fishing factory that was defunct or that was flooded within a few years, right? So that's also what you want to avoid with this kind of program. So you want to build processes in place that really are able to deal with adaptive systems. And then the third point is really the partnership. So realizing also that, for instance, WFP and the partners are also an external player coming in, also not able to do everything. It's critical that they bring on board a range of different partners that are aligned to the common vision, that can also support the development of a portfolio of different interventions that could also synergize well with each other. So that's what we're trying to develop with this systemic theory of change. And it's really about also building in all these different properties of adaptive management within these programs. So relationship building, phasing of different programs, understanding that you might have some quick wins that you'd like to realize, while also you start investing in some long-term issues that might only bear fruit in 10 years, for instance. Building in mechanisms that will be able to respond to crises in the pastoralist domain. And being able to respond to that, but while also preserving earlier gains, etc. Mindset change among the different stakeholders, building experimentation and learning. etc. So this is what we're working on now. So I can't share too much yet on how it looks in the end. So this is something we'll be working on the coming months. But let me just close with a final slide saying, this is something we've been seeing in a general sense. And oh yeah, so this is one example of a slide that I just added. But essentially what we're seeing is that if we want to develop a system that's sustainable, that's giving the benefits to the stakeholders around the lake as well as the local environment, we need to be aware of all these different subsystems that are interacting with each other, and that we sort of look at different dynamics that are connecting with these different subsectors. And this means that our intervention and our pathways will need to feed into to a range of different domains here. And this is just one of the ways in which we're trying to also bring stakeholders on board with our perspective as well. Some concluding insights. Well, to transform food systems, we need to really understand and also practice complex adaptive systems thinking. We try to also integrate a systemic approach in programming, which is very different to what a lot of actors are used to. It's about testing out ideas. It's about being adaptive, learning about what works and doesn't work. We also realize that change in food systems will always be a multi-stakeholder process in which established power relations and mindsets will need to be confronted. So this is one of the critical things we've been discussing a lot with the partners. It's about indeed trying to understand a bit more the deeper aspects of how systems are perpetuated and how they change. And then also finally creating this new narrative or this new vision of the future among the different possible futures that could emerge, and also practicing a bit of patience in the process. That's all from my side.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bram, and virtual applause from all of us around the world to you and for your work. Ramin, would you like to pick a question from the chat, or should we start?
Let me see. I see let's see, many. Well, Carlo asked just a question now. Maybe he wants to chime in, and then Brian has a question as well. So Carlo, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I don't know, perhaps whether there are some other questions, but I will jump in. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking and writing at the same time, so apologies if they were like all condensed there. Bram, thank you so much. I think also, as you're aware, we work also in Kenya and especially also in food systems and especially with leadership, right? So like who should bear the like you can understand complexity and come up with an envisioning plan, but who should actually, besides facilitate, who should convene the people, who should have who has this power in a way, right? This is the big question that I guess many in this room share. How do we move from the envisioning to the making? And of course, I'm not implying that there is an answer out of that, as also these kind of projects, I guess that are relatively new and they are experimenting. It's just a reflection to you, because I heard many organizations involved in this path, and eventually, especially in our program, we are wondering, among the participants, perhaps there is someone who can convene this, and how does the conflict among even who should facilitate this process, because anybody also there may have an idea of how to move forward. How do you deal with this complexity itself, even in the planning? And I think this may really help us to understand what, where to go from here, and who has agency eventually to change. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's one aspect of indeed concern. I mean, that's also why, in a way, we try to do this in a very participatory way. So we indeed get as many different perspectives and bring as many different players to the table to get an understanding of the situation, and also to see who does what in the system and who indeed has power within that system. I think what we're trying to do in this situation is to empower those who are at this moment vulnerable. It's also about helping those different groups to organize themselves. So, for instance, you can think about different fishermen groups who are indeed in some way interacting with this situation, and you try to bring them on board. but the nature of the situation is also that you have to work with the business actors who are trying to source from the lake. We have to be aware that the local government has its own way of working, which is sometimes conducive, but also sometimes limiting. So in a way, we're trying to be aware of all these different aspects and try to identify which areas seem very promising. But yeah, I guess there's no, I mean, at some stage you have to also try and see what works and see what emerges. And I think that's what we're trying to instill with the different partners as well, is that it might be that things don't work well, or at least you have to be aware of certain dynamics that are leading to negative outcomes and try to correct as you go along. So I think that's also a bit of a process that we're trying to put in place without knowing exactly how it's going to end up.
I see. Did it happen, just a follow-up, very quick, if I may, did it happen to you in your process to exclude people? Not you yourself, but the participants themselves. And who took this decision? I mean, perhaps it's too many questions, but I'm so interested to understand also. Perhaps we can follow up bilaterally. I guess that's also.
No, I mean, there's a whole range of issues that you encounter with these kind of processes because it's never perfect. I think what we saw, for instance, is that it's difficult to mobilize, especially the women who are, especially those coming from the pastoralist area, as almost a refugee who are trying to get involved into these fisheries, right? So these are really vulnerable people. At the same time, it's difficult to really mobilize the players who are powerful, right? Because they have no particular interest in changing the system, right? So I think that's one thing that we have to be very conscious of. And having said that as well, is that some of this stuff is also difficult, right? So I think that's also one of the challenges we're encountering, is that if you want to talk about complex issues with a lot of different stakeholders, you have to break it down and make it understandable for everyone. But even so, the language barrier is always there, right? So we try to do things in local languages in some cases, but from my side, I don't speak that language, neither do my colleagues. So that's always a barrier that you will see.
Thanks, Bram.
But I mean, should we give the word to Tanya next?
Maybe I'll just ask Brienne's question, if that's helpful, just a little bit. How did you go about developing the scenarios? And then I think Tanya has a question as well.
Yeah, that's a nice one. So what we did was we went through a process of data analysis, and we created a whole range of different data points, data patterns from different dimensions of the food system. And we tried to, together with the stakeholders, we tried to distinguish between what we saw as trends, which are sort of moving in a certain direction that we could at least sort of see the direction in which it's going. So, I mean, climate change was one of those factors where we're saying, okay, this is happening basically, right? So this is a trend. But there are certain things that are just really uncertain, right? And so those different those uncertainties could move in many different directions. So one of these, for instance, was the extent to which benefits will be shared from the economic elements of the lake. And so we selected a range of critical uncertainties that we felt were absolutely central to the situation around the lake, but also to the success of the program. And based on these different combinations of uncertainties, we came up with different descriptions of certain situations emerging in, say, 2040. And each group sort of developed that separately and then presented that to each other. And then we did a couple of exercises which are around like, okay, what is the situation of different stakeholders in that future? What will we see happening? Would that be a future that benefits a lot of people, or would there actually be a lot of people losing out in that? And then the second thing was also that we did an exercise where it's about, okay, so which future do you think is most likely to emerge and you think will actually happen if, for instance, it goes the way it goes now? And which scenario would you think is more desirable, for instance, for as many of the different stakeholders as possible? And actually, it was quite interesting that a lot of people actually felt the doomsday scenario was quite likely, right? So this also shows a bit the outlook of the different stakeholders. And at the same time, we saw that the most desired scenario, the first one, which was called Paradiso, was actually seen as very unlikely to the different stakeholders. So a lot of these stakeholders have seen so much and they've also seen so many things fail that you also have to be then aware of the expectations that they have with the project that you're bringing, which is also humbling in a way as well. Yeah.
Tanya, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a terrible writer, so I won't
No
even
worries.
try. But so thank you, Bram. This is a really, a great presentation. And so what comes to my head, and maybe would love to talk to you more, is you're showcasing a very local scenario with a methodology. And I'm sure as Foresight for Food, and that's my question, you also might be working at a global scale and sort of different landscapes, different scenarios, and how do you cross them is part of my question. Like, how do you weave the more methodological, multi-scale approach in your work? First, are you doing that? And second, how are you doing that? But I don't know if we have time to go through.
No, it's a really good point, and we are sort of trying as a global network as well to try to synthesize across the different trends and drivers of the food system as well. So we also have a research agenda which is really more focused on that. We also have increasingly an interest to explore more regional dynamics. So recently we have been organizing a global workshop in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which was more focused on the Asia domain and trying to understand a bit specific drivers and trends and food systems dynamics there. We're also partnering a lot with regional institutions across research institutions across Africa, like FARA. And indeed, we are still also then a bit searching about how to link these different dimensions, right? Because in the end, and this is maybe also, I think, something that's very interesting to discuss in this community of practice, right? In the end, it's arbitrary, right? Where you start your systems perspective and where you set your boundaries, right? And it's all about the stakeholders that you involve and the system of interest that you identify. And I think that's maybe something that I'd be very interested to explore further, is how do you connect these different things? Because what's relevant at global level may not be as relevant in, for instance, Lake Turkana, right? And I think one of the issues that we find important is that this idea of local ideas and local solutions are important, right? So every context is going to be different in the end, but you need a good understanding of how the different global drivers and trends are emerging in that context, because you can't ignore them, right? And I think that's what's often happening, that people are easily sort of discarding things that are outside their scope and then just calling them externalities or influences they can't control.
Super interested.
But yeah, so happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If we have time for one question, there's one.